Despite all the praise I've given to Breath of the Wild, there's one aspect to the game which never sat well with me. No, it wasn't the rain or the weapon durability system or anything like that. In the grander scheme of things, to me personally, these are but minor nitpicks that didn't impede my enjoyment of the overall experience. Even the way the story was portrayed was never really a big issue for me. I thought it fit well with the gameplay, making it more natural for Link to just mess around before making his way to Hyrule Castle. No, the real gripe I had was with Calamity Ganon. I am aware that for Breath of the Wild, Aonuma and his team wanted Ganon to feel more like a force of nature rather than an actual individual. And while I can at least understand that decision, at the same time something felt off about it. For a being that has caused this much destruction and suffering to Hyrule, making him so faceless and abstract kinda takes away from the feeling of menace felt in previous installments. Zelda might not be the pinnacle of complex storytelling and intricate character development, but we have seen villains throughout the series who are cunning, intelligent, and downright crazy and terrifying. Calamity Ganon seems to lack these elements. He's just a thing floating around. He doesn't speak, and it's hard to know exactly what he even is besides Malice turned into a physical or spectral form. In some cases, having a faceless, evil entity that we rarely see or cannot even see its true appearance of can be very effective. The best example I can think of would be Sauron from Lord of the Rings, a disembodied eye atop a massive tower which, despite its weakened state, is still able to exert a menacing dominance over Middle-earth. In a lot of ways, Sauron and Calamity Ganon have a lot in common.
Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring to control all others. And into this ring, he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life.
Both have eyes everywhere to perceive the world from different vantage points. Both were defeated in a battle a long time ago and are weakened to a point where they themselves cannot physically manifest, but rather use corruption and manipulation to have others do their evil bidding. They infest and destroy nature and the balance of the world around them. But the big difference here is that Sauron is always active, building armies and using his minions to corrupt key figures, and simply staring at him or even talking with him can be extremely dangerous, and well, his presence is just downright terrifying. Calamity Ganon doesn't really impose the same type of fear. In my opinion, it's one of the reasons why the ending to the game felt so unfulfilling in a lot of ways. Link and Zelda defeat Calamity Ganon and that's it. Nothing is learned, no curses are cast, motivations made clear. It just ends. It is perhaps the most open-ended Zelda ending ever created. And of course, at the time, we didn't know that a direct sequel, which seems to pick up right after, was going to be made, which explains why it was such an underwhelming finale. Perhaps another parallel to Lord of the Rings, which also just ends and then picks up in the sequel. With Breath of the Wild 2 now underway, things have become a lot more clear about Calamity Ganon. Despite barely knowing anything about the actual story or gameplay, we have at least learned why Calamity Ganon felt like such a nothing character. It's because he was nothing, just a manifestation of hatred being controlled from deep underground by the true source of evil, Ganondorf. It's actually very reminiscent of Phantom Ganon. It also explains why, despite Calamity Ganon being such a faceless and seemingly brainless character, he is still seen to have an actual intelligence behind it, which is reflected by his actions. And what if Calamity Ganon, or rather Ganondorf's plans, span much further back, and even seemingly unrelated events might be attributed to his manipulation and strategy? This puppet master / puppet dynamic fascinates me, and it's a topic that I've been wanting to cover for a while now. So strap in as we take a look at the potentially much bigger picture regarding Ganondorf, his malice, and his plans for Hyrule. The first and most obvious indication of Calamity Ganon possessing a clear intelligence is of course the corruption of the Sheikah tech itself. Right before the battle of 10,000 years ago, he arose just like he did recently. What he didn't account for, however, was that the ancient Sheikah had built a massive army of automata to stop him in his tracks. And as is tradition, after being weakened by this mechanized army, he was struck by the Sword of Evil's Bane and sealed away by Princess Zelda of that era, who possessed the sealing power from Goddess Hylia. However, as we all know now, this was just Malice, not the actual individual Ganondorf himself that got sealed. It is made clear throughout the story of the game and now by the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 that Ganondorf spends around 10,000 years to gather up enough Malice to launch another attack, or Calamity if you will, upon Hyrule. During these 10,000 years, Ganondorf had enough time to think of a new strategy to deal with this newfound technology. He is a very patient man. A strategy he was finally able to put into practice 100 years ago by using his Malice not to just manifest himself, but also take control of said technology. This is a clear indication that the brain behind Calamity Ganon learned from his defeat 10,000 years ago and has been scheming all this time. But I feel like in terms of his plans, this may be only the tip of the iceberg, and there are several hints to this, some of which have been covered by other theorists as well. First and foremost, the prophecy. Nintendo Black Crisis already made a great video about how the prophecy may have been misunderstood.
A prophecy that misread could have been.
A few years after Zelda was born, a still unnamed person foretold the return of Ganon. There are some suggestions that this might have been Zelda's mother, the Queen of Hyrule, but as of right now, this has yet to be confirmed, and this fortune teller, as he or she is referred to, remains totally anonymous. Here's where one thing doesn't make sense though. Before the calamity was predicted by this unknown person, the Sheikah technology was buried and forgotten. Had this foresight never come to light, Ganon would have just appeared one day and nobody would have seen it coming. But if Ganondorf's plan was to take over the Guardians and Divine Beast by using his Malice all along, this plan would have only worked if the ancient Sheikah's technology was uncovered by the time of his return. The message the fortune teller received was literally that the way to oppose Ganon was buried beneath the ground, which of course led to the large-scale excavations under the command of the royal family. As far as theories go, the one that appeals to me the most is that what if this prophecy wasn't some divine message, but rather a manipulation by Ganondorf, a message from the King of Evil himself, either through some telepathic message or, as some suggest, a Yiga spy or other type of Ganon loyalist posing as the fortune teller. I mean, think about it, the only way for Ganondorf to be able to take control of the most powerful and dangerous army in Zelda history and execute his plan required this army to be unearthed. He needed this army to be found before his rise, and by announcing his return in advance, he knew that the Hylians would go out of their way to find these ancient relics. He may have seen the sheer power and potential of this army during the battle of 10,000 years ago and decided that this was the force he sought for to eradicate the kingdom of Hyrule. And his patience paid off since, well, when it comes to destroying the kingdom, he came as close as you could possibly get. Where Ganon failed, however, was in dealing with the hero and the princess. A failure that ultimately led to his calamity being halted once again 100 years later. But this isn't to say that he didn't try, and there are clear signs of this. First off, the death of the Queen of Hyrule is already pretty suspicious. Her sudden and unexpected passing is a huge red flag if you ask me. And I'm a firm believer that this wasn't some tragic accident, but rather a conscious attempt by Ganondorf to mess with Zelda's ability to awaken her sealing power. In my video about seeing Zelda potentially becoming queen in Breath of the Wild 2, I mentioned that Zelda's mother might not have possessed the sealing power herself, but rather Zelda's grandmother, and her mother might have married into the royal family and isn't part of the original bloodline. Some comments pointed out that Zelda's wording during her prayer at the Spring of Wisdom does hint that her mother did possess a certain power too, though it is not made clear if this is indeed the sacred sealing power or just some other type of ability. The wording is still vague and not very clear exactly what Zelda means and open to interpretation, in true Nintendo fashion of course. However, for this theory, it doesn't really matter whether or not the queen herself possessed this sealing power. Regardless, whatever the case may be, by killing off the queen, Ganondorf threw a wrench in the works and prevented Zelda from unlocking her sacred gift before the day of the Great Calamity. Either Ganondorf killed Zelda's mother because she had mastered the sealing power herself and would have been able to seal him when he rose up, or wanted to deprive Zelda of a mentor who could teach her to awaken and control said power. Either way, Ganondorf succeeded, and by the time Zelda's ability did awaken, Hyrule was already devastated. The death of the queen took place when Zelda was only around 6 years old, but Ganondorf's attempts at messing with the Hylians' plans don't seem to stop there. This is where we get into his main focus besides getting ready to take over Hyrule Castle, namely disposing of Link and Zelda. Ganondorf has been around since the distant past. He knows full well what the rules are, and that the keys to his defeat lie within the presence of the hero wielding the sword that seals the darkness, the Master Sword, and the one who possesses the blood of the goddess Hylia, aka Princess Zelda. If he wanted his plan to eradicate Hyrule once and for all to succeed, he had to get rid of them, or else, similar to 10,000 years ago, his attempt may fail yet again. In the months leading up to his appearance from deep below Hyrule Castle, some very significant events started taking place. For one, monsters around Hyrule, who previously didn't even pose a problem anymore for the kingdom, started to grow more restless and their numbers started to increase. And they even went as far as to attack travelers and settlements more frequently and seemingly more coordinated. These attacks could of course just have been random and monsters doing what monsters do, but at the same time this could have also been Ganon's way of trying to catch Link and Zelda in the crossfire of these attacks in hopes that one or both would not survive to tell the tale. Zelda even mentions that she believes the intensity and frequency of these attacks to be an omen of Ganon's looming return. Little did she know, her and Link may have been the main target. Additionally, the Yiga clan also started to become more active and even made an attempt to kill Princess Zelda while she was visiting Gerudo Desert. And this to me is one of the biggest indicators of Ganondorf seemingly wanting to get rid of Zelda and Link before he made his grand return. This assassination attempt was likely him trying to get rid of Princess Zelda as an extra assurance that she will not be there to awaken her powers and seal his malice the day he makes his move. But what about Link? As far as we know, he seems to be doing just fine throughout the moments leading up to the Great Calamity, right? Aside from him being a total badass and slaying hordes of monsters which attack the kingdom, he never seems to be a direct target, with the exception of one particular cutscene. This scene where Daruk is practicing to get Divine Beast Varadania under his control while being accompanied by Link has always struck me as a bit odd. After taking the beast for a spin, the two start conversing about Ganon's return, Daruk's motivations, Link's newly appointed task to protect the princess, etc. When all of a sudden the ground starts to tremble and a huge boulder is sent hurtling down towards the two. And had it not been for Daruk, this would have surely been the end of Link. I mean, look at this. This isn't some random landslide. This single boulder is going straight for them. What are the odds that Death Mountain starts shaking in this exact location and raining down a rock this size to the exact place where Link is standing? This isn't some huge earthquake where tons of rock are sliding down the mountain and they just so happen to be in the path of destruction. One very specific pillar breaks and only sends down a small handful of rocks soaring down. This is just too much of a coincidence if you ask me. Even Daruk comments on the strangeness of the situation and how Death Mountain has been quiet for decades. The way this is shown and worded definitely hints that this event has something to do with Calamity Ganon's return. And the game doesn't really make a big secret out of this. But I would go a step further and say that this wasn't just Death Mountain growing more restless because Calamity Ganon is returning. I would suggest that this was a direct attempt on Link's life by Ganondorf, to get rid of the hero before he has a chance to mess with his plans. And if what I proposed in my Breath of the Wild chronological puzzle video is true and Ganondorf has the power to create earthquakes like he did in the past, this random event on Death Mountain being a strategically planned assassination attempt becomes more plausible. Last but not least, the timing of Ganon's return. This one has been covered by other creators and theorists, and while this one does have a high probability that this was just coincidence or unfortunate timing, it is quite peculiar how everything played out the moment Calamity Ganon finally appeared. Firstly, it's on the exact day that Zelda ventures to the Spring of Wisdom with the 5 champions, basically giving him a head start as all the pilots are now nowhere near their divine beasts. Secondly, the interruption of Mipha. Right as she is about to tell Zelda that she thinks of the one she loves, aka Link, when she uses her healing power and thus possibly revealing how Zelda could unlock her power, she is unable to finish her sentence. And Mipha, had she been able to say what she wanted to say, was totally right. Zelda's love for Link was ultimately what caused her to finally awaken her sacred gift, but by the time she did, most of the damage had already been done. Again, this could be just unfortunate timing, but you gotta admit this was very favorable for Ganon, and could just as well have been him pulling the strings yet again. All this stuff combined, the sudden rise in monster attacks, the attempts on Link and Zelda's life, the confusing and suspicious prophecy, the Queen's death, as well as all the other strange coincidences taking place, leads me to believe that Ganondorf had a much greater influence on the world above ground than the game initially reveals. The big question that remains though is, how did Ganondorf know all of this? How was he able to coordinate so well while being sealed deep underground? As we learn in game and from Masterworks, Ganondorf uses eyes of malice to see above ground, and even the development developers made it clear that this was purposely done to always remind you that Ganon is everywhere and always watching. So Ganondorf is basically the architect from the Matrix. However, during the events of 100 years ago, no Malice was yet present above ground until after Ganondorf rose from the depths of Hyrule Castle. How was he able to know where Zelda would be, where Link would be, where to execute his monster attacks or assassination attempts? The only way this was possible is if someone was coordinating with Ganondorf, reporting to him, feeding him information, and generally being his eyes and ears above ground. This leads me into one of my favorite theories about Breath of the Wild, that the Yiga may have been directly speaking with Ganondorf. Not Calamity Ganon, but the man himself, the puppet master. How exactly this is achieved is not entirely clear. One theory presented by Masked Nintendo Bandit suggests that the Yiga possibly dug their way down into Hyrule's underground from within their own hideout. This hole, which is found in the arena where you fight the present-day Yiga leader, Master Koga, is very suspicious and, well, just so random. Why would this huge and seemingly bottomless pit be located here? Its features definitely show that it's something man-made. Whether or not this hole was already here or dug by the Yiga themselves, or since it's also connected to a Sheikah shrine in the DLC, maybe dug by the ancient Sheikah, is up for debate. But it does seem like such a weird inclusion to their hideout. This hole has to be of more importance than we are allowed to see in game. I mean, it's just too weird. Another possibility is that Ganondorf has simply been able to speak with the Yiga leadership telepathically or spiritually or whatever you want to call it, and give them instructions on what to do next. And again, this is something he has been able to do in the past, where we can hear him speak without him actually being in the room. The Yiga are, in a lot of ways, a bunch of goofballs. It's just very hard for me to imagine that they themselves came up with the plan to kill Zelda out of nowhere. Their motivations in general are not always very clear. We know that they are at war with the Gerudo and they are loyal to Ganon. But Ganon has, at this point, not been seen for the past 10,000 years. It's kinda hard to stay loyal, not to mention motivated, and pass on the information on what to do during the next attack for such an insanely long time. Up until the prophecy, the Hylians and even the current-day Sheikah had completely forgotten about even the existence of Ganon. For all intents and purposes, the Yiga are but one of Ganon's pawns on the chessboard, a tool he can use to aid him while he was scheming for his return. It's unlikely that the Yiga knew all the rules and the key elements about the events of 10,000 years ago to this very day. The Yiga might be badass ninja assassins from outer space. No, not from space, but the point is, they are not competent enough to know about all the details about Ganon, what he even looks like, what his plans are, and what needs to be done, unless Ganondorf has been talking to them. The Yiga used to be Sheikah, so their lifespan is about the same, which is only a bit longer than the average Hylian. If not even the Sheikah and the Hylians were able to remember the existence of Ganon, how would the Yiga know anything? Most of the information they got was from spying on the Hylians and the Sheikah, who also didn't know much. You get the point. The sudden increase in their activity in the months leading up to the Great Calamity seems to at least indicate that they had some access to Ganondorf's plans, maybe on a need-to-know basis. Ganondorf's inability to dispose of Link and Zelda during and before the Great Calamity ultimately led to the defeat of his Malice puppet 100 years later. However, this isn't to say that this was the extent of his plans. Perhaps Breath of the Wild 2 will reveal Ganondorf's plan B. And for all we know, Link and Zelda's little cave adventure, which leads them to finding his corpse, is all part of the plan. Maybe it's Ganondorf who sets them on this path and wants to be found so he can break free from his seal. Whatever the case may be, I am very excited to see what happens, and I'm also hoping that the game will shed some more light on the events during the backstory of Breath of the Wild. Who this mysterious fortune teller was, why the queen died so suddenly and unexpectedly. Since this is a direct sequel, we could see some of these events play out from the perspective of Ganondorf. And if he is properly voiced, which I really hope he will be, he could explain more about himself and his motivations like he did in Twilight Princess and The Wind Waker. And that is all for now. Let me know in the comments what you think of this whole situation. What will Ganondorf's plans be in Breath of the Wild 2? Will we see his Malice play another major role, or will Nintendo tone this down and focus on something else? Something new, perhaps? As always, a big thanks to my Patreons, of which I have a couple of new ones joining the maze, so please welcome Austin Barrett, Jasper Freke, Legend of Levi, Charles Zaz, as well as an honorable mention to Stephen N. Parker, who just upgraded his pledge. Thank you all very much, you beautiful people you. I will see you all next week for some more Zelda goodness, and also look forward to my Paper Mario The Origami King review very soon. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and this is Don signing off. Have a good one.